Hi, this is Rabbi Orlofsky, and welcome back to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. I hope you all had a wonderful Yontif, and it was invigorating and exciting and enjoyable, as it should be. Yeah. I have a little bits of business I have to take care of first. I'm going to be in St. Louis, May, Shabbos, right after Lag BaOmer. If anyone's in St. Louis who would like to go there, we'd love to see you then. And in Mitzvah Hashem, the week before then, we will be having another live Rabbi Orlofsky show. I will give you the details in Mitzvah Hashem in the next podcast. And of course, if you're on our mailing list, if you've signed up, we'll send that out to you and try to keep you up to date. The last time we didn't give people much lead time, and so I know there were a lot of people who wanted to participate. And what can I tell you? There's nothing like our Rabbi Orlofsky Show community, of which I am just a member. And in fact, we'll get to the question and answers at the end, but someone wrote an interesting thing. Ploni Almoni asked, would you consider starting a shidduch aspect to your website to let young people entering the parasha use your shiurim as a starting reference point to find people? Listening to your podcast already means they must have a lot in common. I think that's a brilliant idea. And I would love to see a shidduch section on it. And if we can make some shidduchim and take a bunch of Rabbi Orlofsky crazies and put them all together, the world can only be a better place. So we're going to add that in. But of course, that's the next announcement, is that we have been speaking for a number of months now about the upcoming Tefila series. And we are about to begin. We have weighed all of the different times that are good for people. And the majority of people say that Sunday afternoon Eastern Standard Time is probably the best time for the majority of people. Now, not for everybody, obviously. But it turns out the most people who responded, that works out to be a good time. So we are going to be setting it up. Our launch is going to be Sunday afternoon, May 8th. If you're in Israel, it'll be Sunday night. If you're in Los Angeles, it'll be Sunday morning. If you're in Australia, it'll be Wednesday. If you're in South Africa, they don't have any tech over there. Just kidding. Don't need any upset Africans calling me up saying, we're very upset about the fact that Rabbi Orlofsky seemed to imply that our technology is not today. I finally figured it out, and that was during apartheid when there was a boycott. They weren't able to get any vowels. And that's the reason. The certificate that took it, you have no vowels in any of the words. Just kidding. I love it. Yeah. Lekker. Anyway, so that's going to be launching. If you want to sign up, you go to rabbiorlofsky.com/tefila, which you can see on your screen over here. That's one L, Tefila. And that's it. We're going to get started. We're going to raise the level. And again, we're going to be focusing mostly on understanding the tefillah so that when I daven, I can understand what I'm saying and make it meaningful to me. That's going to be the focus of this year. And as I mentioned, we have a very strong online community. A lot of people feel a strong connection to the podcast, to the show. And in fact, in the last episode, one of the questions we asked is why the yeshiva guys seem not to be careful about their dress and appearance. And one person wrote me, said she's a big fan of the show, but she was offended. I felt I was casting aspersions on B'nai Yeshiva, and there are, it's not the problem that I'm making it out to be. I appreciate you being Malamed Chus on the B'nai Torah, and I hope when we get up to Shemayim, you have a good word to say about me, because I'm going to need whatever I can. Have people put in good words for me up there. There was a book that was written 20, 30 years ago called The World of the Yeshiva by a sociologist. His last name was Helmreich. And he himself is a frum person. And he wrote an analysis of the yeshiva world. And he pointed this out, that this was part of the phenomenon. I have been in yeshivas where I have heard Rebbeim speak about this problem. Plus, I've seen it with my own eyes. So the one thing you know on this show that we do not do is say, everything's fine, there are no problems. We always address issues. So although it's true that it's not everybody, it's also true that it's not nobody. And since there is a perception, the perception needs to be addressed. Therefore, if someone asks the question, why is it that so many executives on Wall Street have an unkempt appearance, nobody would know what you're talking about. But when you say it about B'nai Yeshiva, people understand. And you can say there's a svara to it. Rav Moshe Shapiro spoke about this once in a shiur, how people would make comments about the fact that Reb Chaim Brisker was not careful about his appearance. And he tied it into the Gemara with Rabbi Yoshua, where the Caesar's daughter says to him, why are you so ugly? Yeah. And the whole story over there with the wine, right? He says, why do you keep your father's wine in these ugly earthenware vessels? Why don't you keep it in gold and silver? And she does, and of course it oxidizes and all goes bad, So he says, sometimes an ugly kli holds things better than a beautiful kli. He says, well, what about the chachamim who look nice? So he says, if they were as ugly as me, they would be smarter than they are. So Reb Moshe explained that there's two different approaches. There's, on the one hand, being able to maintain a status as mentor, and you're mechuyev to. On the other hand, there's an idea of being mashpil yourself and moving away from physicality. So whether there's a philosophical overtone to it or not doesn't make a difference. The fact is, it's a phenomena that exists. And I know often before Tisha B'Av, they have these shiurim on Shmiras HaLashon, and I speak about them. And sometimes people come up to me afterwards and say, you were very critical of Klal Yisrael. I feel like that was Lashon Hara about the Jewish people. And I said, well, what are you going to do with Yeshayahu? What do you do with that whole Sefer? What do you do with Yirmiyahu? I mean, if you're a social critic, then you're in a position at times of pointing out that there are problems. That's the nature of the beast. In fact, I'm pretty sure I told this story. We have a men Shmiras HaLashon that we usually do once a year before Tisha B'Av. And I used to ask for Bullman Zatzal if he would speak, and he kept brushing me off. So finally I said, Rebbe, why don't you want to speak? And he says, because I'm afraid that the public emphasis on Shmiras HaLashon is being used to silence criticism. So, of course, that doesn't mean that you're allowed to cast aspersions where there's none there, but you are obligated to talk about problems, without going into the subject, because it's not my place to talk about it. But, we had a recent scandal in Klal Yisrael where somebody who was very well known was engaging in all kinds of terrible activity, and people were like, why didn't people say things? Yeah. So the answer is people did as soon as they found out about it. They're just saying that let's not paint everyone with the same brush, They do this to Republicans in America. When a Republican does something, they run around to every Republican and say, do you condemn this? Do you condemn this? Do you condemn this? They never do that with Democrats. When Bernie Sanders supporter shot up a bunch of Republicans at a baseball game, nobody ran around to all the Democrats saying, do you condemn this? Do you condemn this? Yeah. Same thing happens here in Eretz Yisrael. When something happens, so the media runs around to every Haredi, Knesset member, do you condemn this? Do you condemn this guy? But when something happens, against Haredim, they don't run around to the secular people and ask them to condemn it. So when you run away to Chashuv Rabbanim and say, do you condemn, child molestation? Do I need to come out on this? Do you think I'm in favor? You thought I was pro, so I have to make a public statement that I'm against molestation. Yes, I think molestation is a terrible thing. Okay, I mean, why would you even demand that? So you say, okay, there's a problem that needs to be addressed. Everyone agrees the problem has to be addressed, but one thing everyone agrees is you don't cover it up. So when I talk about problems that exist in Klal Yisrael, right? I'm a big believer in not covering things up. Let's talk about what the issues are, address them, and try to fix them. And that's why I am one of the major forces for good in the world. And that makes you, by extension, part of our... And when you get married through the Rabbi Orlofsky website, and we build little Rabbi Orlofsky show families throughout the world, this is getting really frightening. Anyway, so I just want to take care of those bits of business. All right. I've said this more than once. They say when you get old, the first thing that goes is your memory. Second thing is, I don't remember. But anyway, you get the idea. I have a bad memory. I don't just attribute it to age. I believe it's also genetic. As long as I can remember, most of the people that my father knew were named, what's that guy? It's definitely genetic. I'm one of 6 boys. And I would be standing right there, and my mother would say to me, Bruce, Jason, Mark. I'll go, keep going. You'll get to me eventually. So I'm pretty sure it's genetic. I have a poor memory. Compounded with age, it's just frightening. And so I can't say that this happens to anyone else, but I walk into a room and I forget why. I don't know why I'm here. I open the refrigerator looking. I open this for something. I don't know what. And these things are happening to me with greater frequency, I'm sorry to say. And so I want to tell you a story. My father-in-law, Moshe Chaim Gans, he was nifter during Pesach, and his yahrzeit comes out on the 5th night of Pesach. So we had a Suda, and I spoke a little bit about the 5th night of Pesach. I was working with the Atbash of the tour, where he says every day of Pesach corresponds on the calendar to another different yontif, and I wanted to say that there's a relationship between each day of Pesach and that yontif, and the 5th night would correspond to Yom Kippur and why that would be. And okay, it was absolutely fascinating. Anyway, by the time everything finished, I realized I still have to prepare my daf yomi. This is Yavamas. I gotta spend time on this. So I went up to the base medrash to prepare it. It's already after 11. And after I prepared, I realized I hadn't davened Ma'ariv. It was late. Okay, so I davened in the base medrash, and I counted Sefira Vayikra. The next night, when I was in shul for Ma'ariv, and they counted Sefira Vayikra, they said, it's the 5th night. And I said, I don't remember last night if I counted 4 or 5. Because in my head, since I'd been talking about the 5th night of Pesach, which is, of course, the 4th night of the Omer, it could be that I counted 5 because that's what was in my head. And I couldn't remember. So for the next 2 days, I counted without a bracha because I wasn't sure. And 2 days later, I remembered. I went to Ma'ariv that night. And I confirmed with my wife. She says, yeah, before everything started, you ran up and went to daven Ma'ariv. So I forgot that I davened Ma'ariv, and I davened Ma'ariv again, and I forgot what Sefira I counted the second time. Ay, ay, ay. What will become of all the memories? Yeah. So memory's a tricky thing. I can't speak for anybody else here, but do you remember vividly something that never happened? You remember when you were in school and this happened and that happened and it never happened, but you remember it. Memory is a tricky thing. We remember things. So we're now in Sefira Vayikra, and obviously you have to remember to count. There are apps that are there to remind you what the night is, make sure and count, things like that. A friend of mine, Rabbi Rudman, started a WhatsApp for the 48 things that you need to be Makabel Torah, which correspond to the time between Pesach and Shavuos. He had asked me to mention it the last podcast. Of course, this will come as a surprise to you. I forgot, but it's not too late if you want to sign up. The details will be on the screen. He'll send you each day an insight into what midah you should be working on, lefi the memchas dvarim, on that particular day. Full disclosure, Rabbi Rudman is one of my Talmud Chacham friends who I go to when I don't know what I'm talking about. And he's if you have an opportunity to participate, it's brilliant. He also has a parsha sheet that he sends out. I mean, just marvelous things. But anyway, so there are all these different apps and things to help you remember. And I saw one year someone sent around, they said, they came out with this great app to remember this, what night of Sefira it is. Daven Ma'ariv with a minion. That's an Eitzah Tova for you over there. That's for free. You can keep that one. I'm throwing that one right out for you. But it's an interesting idea because the parshios that come out between Pesach and Shavuos, you'll find very often have a 7 theme to it. Yeah. You obviously Parshas Emor, you have the mitzvah of Sefira Vayikra and the mitzvah to count 7 days, 7 times, right? 7 weeks to remember Sefira Vayikra. That's a pretty obvious one. At the beginning of Emor, it talks about Kohanim and the 7 relatives that they're allowed to become Tameh for. Bahar B'chukosai, obviously Bahar, you have the din of Shemitah, count 7 years. And then it says count 7 years, 7 times, 49. And then you come to Yovel, which is obviously a parallel to the times of counting Sefira Vayikra. In Parshat B'chukosai, it gives you 7 sets of 7 klolos, says Rashi. 7 sevens of klolos, also going down. So there's this concept of counting these sevens. The Rav Dessler points out that there's a mitzvah to count. One is called Sefira Vayikra, and the other one is Shiva Nikiyim. Now, women today, when they're going to the mikveh, so they have to count Shiva Nikiyim, and that's the Rabbanan instituted that on the off chance that they're a zava, which is a different type of tumah. But a zav and a zava have to count Shiva Nikiyim before they can go to the mikveh. It's a mitzvah to count 7 days. A mitzorah, obviously, has 7 days, and it comes back another 7 days. So there's this concept of counting to be able to get you to tahara. Why? Because tumah is very easy. You know what you have to do to become tameh? Just don't think. Hesach hadas, you forget, you're tameh. We all know that. you wash your hands. When I was a kid, we'd go on a trip. So they would say, you could wash your hands in the school and you'll make hamotzi on the bus. And you're walking like this, like a surgeon. Yeah. Because you're afraid that if you lose your concentration, you'll go back. If you just don't think, why did your hands become tameh? Your daim maskoni is same. People aren't aware of where they're touching, what they're doing. It's a very interesting thing. Tahara requires a tremendous amount of concentration. To become tameh, you just have to not think. So we were on the lowest level of tumah, and we had to work ourselves up to the highest level of kedusha. The way you do that is by counting. What does that mean? Stay in the count. Think. Are you aware what you're doing, where you're coming from? If you're in my online Masil Sharm Shir, so you know that when we do Zahiris, it's always tricky to come up with a good definition of the terms. If you have the old Masil Sharm, it used terms like, for Zahiris and Zerizis, watchfulness and zeal. Two terms that means nothing to anybody. Yeah. If you had the newer translation, it used words like vigilance and alacrity. Two words that have no meaning and also are wrong. That's not really what Zahiris and Zerizis mean. So what is Zahiris? It's taken me a long time to find the right word, and that's always the trick with translations. I am working, one of the many projects that I'm working on, in a desultory fashion, is I'm making a translation of Mesilas Yesharim into English. Now, what do I mean? So, ArtScroll translated the Torah into ArtScroll language, which is very similar to English. It's a dialect. But there are words in it like behold and vessels and forsooth and victuals and victuals and things like that. Nobody really uses these words. Nobody's ever in the kitchen and says, "Could you pass me that vessel?" Yeah, so it's a problem. I've spoken about this in the past. So Aryeh Kaplan sat down to write a translation of the Torah into English. So I've been working on that on Mesilas Yesharim very hard. Because Vilna Gaon said there were no extra words in the first 11 prakim of Mesilas Yesharim, so you have to cut out words to translate it, and you have to do it in a way that that's going to make sense to the reader, even though you're going to be leaving out some of the ideas that the Ramchal said. But okay, you can learn pshat in every single word, so there's no way to turn it in. And a lot of people who I've met who started Mesilas Yesharim and never finished it, one of the reasons is the translation. So you have the option to join my online Mesilas Yesharim Shiur, and then you can, go through the Sefer with me, and I will walk you through at least on my level, an elementary level. And but I want to try to get a translation which, although not perfect, will at least be readable. So one of the big problems is to come up with a good word for the terms that he's using in English. And that's why sometimes there's no word that's available to it. When we do the Tefila series, I'm going to talk about this, but lahodos lahalel shabech lefe'el ramem lahadel levrech olel kales. So when you look in the English, he's high and mighty and extolled and exalted and praised and it's just copied out a list for praise from the thesaurus. If you're not familiar with a thesaurus basically has a whole bunch of words for every word except thesaurus. There is no other word for thesaurus. Ironic, but so they copied out a bunch of words. But lefa'er and l'shabeach, you have to find there may not even be a word in English. You have to, it's a concept that you need to explain. And that's often the problem. I remember Rabbi Dovid Gottlieb was so upset when the Art Scroll translation first came out. And he says, look, they translate malacha as work. How many times have we had to explain that there's a big difference between malacha and avoda? And one is a creative act and one is physical labor, and they don't mean the same thing. So it means not to work on Shabbos. It's true. But what's the English word for malacha? I don't know if there is an English word for malacha. That's why you get stuck. So finally, they came up with a word for Zahiris, the secular world. It's now a big term in psychology, and it's a major movement in psychology. It's called mindfulness. Mindfulness means being aware all the time, and I've talked this through with people, and we're more or less in agreement that probably Zahiris, the best word for it is mindfulness. Don't do anything without thinking. Be aware where you are. Be conscious of what's going on. Sefira Ha'omer is mindfulness. It means you have to, if you want to become taha, you have to be conscious. You have to focus. You have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so you think to yourself, okay, all I'm doing is counting. Obviously, it's not all you're doing. But even that itself, which means that I'm maintaining a certain level of consciousness. I know what day it is and where I am. Yeah. My mother of Shalom, every now and then she would collapse and they would have to get the EMTs just like pick her up, and she wasn't very mobile. And they were worried that maybe she, had lost consciousness, and they would ask her, questions. What's your name? Where do you live? Yeah. Who's the president of the United States? She's like, how do I know? It's not the kind of thing that people always know. One of the things that the Chazon Ish insisted when he met with Ben Gurion, because they wanted the Haredi community to be part of the new state, was you cannot draft religious girls into the army. I know it was a big issue, but okay, he gave it on it. So when a religious girl wants to be exempted, they ask her questions. So sometimes they ask, what's the parsha? She doesn't know. Didn't go to shul. She doesn't know parsha. She's got a job. She's working in a gan. Gan, you would know the parsha. She's working as a secretary. She doesn't always know the parsha. You're not always in on that. My good friends, the Freeds, from the Sivas tours, I've spoken many times about the wonderful experiences we had going to Europe. And let's see if anybody backs me up on this. I'm sure there must be some people, one of the tours, who watch the podcast. One of the reasons he stopped the tours is because he says it just wasn't financially viable. So I said to him, that's why people in Habosas HaTorah should never run business ventures. Just charge more money. They'll cover your costs. How much is this? How hard is this to work out? He's not comfortable. He's not comfortable charging more. So if anybody out there was with me on the Nesivas tours and we would like to do it again, I think it'd be a wonderful thing this Thanksgiving weekend to go back to Spain. It was warm and beautiful, and when we went that time, we only did southern Spain. We didn't do, parts of Barcelona and some other areas. So if you're interested, please contact the Freeds right away in Nesivas tours and tell them Rabbi Orlofsky's right. I'll pay more. Have a chance to go to Spain and spend quality time with Rabbi Orlofsky. Thank you very much. Anyway, so, we were in Prague, and we were davening Shabbos at the Alta Noi Shul. Now, this is so interesting. There are goyim who are trying to get into the shul. So they have guards there, not for security reasons, but because they think there are people who are trying to sneak in so they can see the shul without paying the entrance fee. That's what they're there for. So when you're there, the guards ask you questions to make sure you're Jewish. They say, what's the parsha? So, Lech Lecha. What's it about? So, well, the Maharal explains that the whole theme of Lech Lecha is that when Parshas Noach ends, the big number is 7. And there's 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach and 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 pure animals. Whereas at the end of Lech Lecha, Avram Avinu gets the bris milah on the 8th day. When the story opens, Avram is 75, which the Maharal says is between 7 and 8. And so the whole thing is making the transition. He goes, oh, okay. He didn't know what he was getting, Sometimes you get too much information, yeah. TMI is the term that my children like to use when people are oversharing. TMI, too much information. Occasionally, it's WTMI, way too much information. But during this time, that's what we're supposed to be working on, among all the other midos that we need. Make sure and sign up for every Redmond's WhatsApp so you can see which midas you should be working on each day. But the general sense is we're counting because we're keeping track of where we are. Yeah. People lose focus all the time. It's a terrible thing. So I thought it was so ironic that I literally experienced that I forgot that I had davened, and I forgot what Sefira I davened on the second Ma'ariv that I davened. It's time for a home. That's really, I need to have supervision. When my mother was getting old and it was difficult, she had an age, and I said, Mom, why don't you come? You can live with us. She says, I'd rather be pushed off a cliff, she said to me. I have to move in with my children. Forget about it, yeah. But, I wouldn't mind a nice home. Sit on the grass. Anyway, it's I used to do this imitation of like an old person sitting down. I don't have to imitate it anymore. I'm there. Life imitates art. Okay, so we're going to work on our mindfulness. We're going to work on being conscious and paying attention. Please don't forget to sign up for the Tefila course. And if you are interested possibly in us starting some sort of a shidduch service, let us know. RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can leave a comment. Okay. And now we come to the question and answer portion of our program. There are 2 questions that I think sort of overlap. Anonymous asks, as someone who has ADD, what do you do when, and in parentheses, if you get overwhelmed? Thank you so much for the chizuk. I've pointed out many times I have ADD. That's why the old joke is, of course, how many kids with ADD does it take to change a light bulb? Want to ride my bike? So I had a fellow who was a Rosh Kollel. He says to me, count your blessings. I had ADHD. You guys, they used to just put in the back of the class and you go like, he says, we were the ones who got beaten because we were bouncing off the walls, In fact, my nephew, Daniel Gans, he shared with me an insight, what does ADHD stand for? Attention deficit, hey, donuts. Anyway, so what do you do when the ADD gets you overwhelmed? I speaking from personal experience. I remember one time, anyway, there's another question. Anonymous asks, over my life, there have been times that I've seen things that I shouldn't have. As much as I try not to think about these inappropriate thoughts, they sometimes come back anyway. Is there a way to not think bad thoughts and to keep a clean mind? So there is a certain overlap in these 2 questions. That's why I put them together. ADD means you have to focus your mind. And you're fighting against your physical brain to try to refocus it. It's very hard because your brain just wanders away. It's just the nature of it. Similarly, if you have bad thoughts, you try not to think them, but they keep coming back. They keep coming back. They haunt you. So, as far as the ADD goes, there is good news. It becomes less intense with age. The older you get, the easier it gets to overcome your ADD. And obviously, during that formative time when you're supposed to be in school and focusing and things like that, that's when it says it's worse. What you have to remember is you are not helpless. You can take control of your brain. The whole section, Masil Shasharim, that's called Tahara, is talking about purifying your thoughts. That's exactly what it's about. Being able to focus on what it is that you want to do. Now, I read years ago, Scientific American, that your brain makes shortcuts. What does that mean? If you know a little bit about computers, you know there's something called a macro, where you push one key and like 6 things happen. You programmed it. It's a small program. And when you do one thing, a whole bunch of different things happen. Your brain does the same thing. If you keep thinking the same set of thoughts, your brain makes a shortcut. As soon as you start to think a particular thing, the first step, your brain goes boom, 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 and takes you to the conclusion. You have to rewire your brain, and you can do that. It's possible. You have to break the connection in the synapses. When the first thought comes to you, refocus. Think about something else. And by the way, this is not only about thinking about inappropriate things, this is also talking about depressing thoughts, sad thoughts, suicidal thoughts. When you start down that road, boom, 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 you end up at that same conclusion. But you can break the pattern. It takes effort. Yeah. If I just let my mind go where it will go, so then, I'm going to end up at that conclusion. You have to stop at a certain point. Now, I spoke to a guy who converted to Judaism, was pretty seriously into Christianity. And he said, I had a big problem when I converted, because whenever I would daven, I would see Jesus on the cross. Now, that's tough. That's tough. There's no question about it. Just a quick shout out that people should appreciate this. The best you can do is prevention. If you avoid certain things, looking at things, listening to things, you'll find it much easier later to be able to avoid it because you never saw it in the first place. Yeah. I may have mentioned this in an earlier podcast. When I was a teenager, I read the book The Source by James Michener, which was a secular presentation of Jewish history. It's worse when they make it into a story, because then you buy into the characters and things. I'm telling you, it took me decades to get those thoughts out of my head. That when I think of Amram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, I wouldn't think of his twisted presentation. It was terrible. It was a terrible thing. But you put these things into your head, it takes a very long time. I'm pretty sure I spoke about this once. I also mentioned there was a book like A Driven Leaf, which basically was an attack on Chazal and the rabbinic process and everything. And when I read that, I was older and I was able to read it with a critical eye. I wasn't a teenager. And I mentioned how I wrote a response to this. And I met an Avreich, in the Mir, in his 40s. He says, I read that book when I was a teenager and I never recovered the Emunas Chachamim I lost. So, people who think that they're going to look and listen to inappropriate things and it's not going to make an impact are mistaken. These things stay in your brain and you have to work very hard. So I said to this guy, how did you get rid of Yashka? He goes, when it would come up, I wouldn't fight it. I would acknowledge it and then move back. Because the more time you spend fighting with it, very often you're giving it more power. Whereas if you just let it, apathy is a tremendous tool. Everything has a positive value. What does laziness do? When you want to do an avera, say, yeah, I'll get to it soon. Use your laziness. Chaim Brisker said, what's the positive aspect of having a krima cup? Not thinking in poor ways. He says, this way, when you see somebody do something and you're pretty sure they're doing the wrong thing, you could be malamed chus because you have a krima cup. You can twist it around and say, oh, I'm sure he was. So those are some techniques. What you have to do is when you feel it overwhelming you, this is what you have to do. When you feel like you're being overwhelmed, let it wash over you like a wave. The more you fight, the harder it's going to be. Let it just, work its little magic, and take a deep breath and start again. There's no other way. Yeah. You got to just keep working. Put one foot in front of the other and do not worry when things mess up because that's built into the system. Hashem gave you this. He knows your limitations and he appreciates the fact that you're working on it. And if you have these bad thoughts, every now and then they'll come. Don't dwell on it. Just, try to blank your mind and move back. Okay. Anonymous asks, the Rav says all the time that you have avoided maturing. How do I do it too? Please answer before it's too late. So what it means is you maintain a childlike delight in life. I used to say about parenting, one of the most important parenting skills you need is to kvel. If you can enjoy little kids. Yeah. When people get older, they become cynical. They become jaded. What I give you today, say the Chazal, every day it should look new to you. Rabbi Orlofsky, he said this in a public speech, so I feel like I can quote it. He says, when I was teaching in Eshet Torah, I would take a cab to Shar Ashba, and I'd run up the steps to Eshet Torah. And one time I realized I didn't even turn to look at the kaisel because you get used to it. I came to Eretz Yisrael. I've told this story in the past. In January 1969, a year and a half after the Six-Day War. And we came up that twisting Bab El Wad, and the bus pulls over to the side of the road, if you can call it the side of the road. And he says, Jews do not ride into Jerusalem, they walk. And it wasn't a religious tour. We all got up, we walked into Yerushalayim. You come back and there was this flowers that were planted to spell out Bruchim Habayim LiYerushalayim. And it took my breath away. I was in 5th grade. And I try to remember that every time I come into Yerushalayim. That childlike delight, that excitement that fills you. And that's when I say I've avoided maturing, I like to think that's what I mean, is that, I haven't allowed myself to become jaded or cynical. Or not that I'm not cynical, but how did you become so sarcastic? I went to sarcasm school. Really? No. Anyway, but what it means is that the childish delight that you're going to have, that's what keeps you young. That's what I mean by it. Adina R asks, I heard Rabbi Orlofsky mention coming up with an approach to korbanos in an old Shiur. Can you please discuss this at some point? Yeah, sure. Korbanos means l'karev, to come close to Hashem. Ideally, we want to give ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why Yitzchak was the ultimate korban. He was ready to give his life to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. His one request was tie me down so I don't move when I see the knife, because I might get scared and then there'll be a mum. I want to be a korban. The famous song, Bilvavi. L'korban akriv lo'es nafshi. I offer myself up. The problem with that is, it's like I saw a cartoon once of suicide bomber school. So the teacher has on the vest, and he was like, watch closely because I'm only going to do this once. You understand? So sacrificing yourself, you can only do that one time. So we bring a korban, which is an animal. Why an animal? Because we see ourselves in an animal. We don't really see ourselves in a piece of bread. Yeah. You don't see yourself so much in a cucumber, unless you're tall and thin. I see myself more as a tomato. But even so, yeah. But when you have an animal that is alive with a nefesh, and you sense it, and that is being offered up in place of you, that's a life-changing experience. And that's why when we stopped having that intention with the korbanos, where we understood that the purpose of the korbanos was to allow us to fill ourselves with a sense of purpose and sacrifice. When we used to just bring sacrifices, that's what we say in the Haftarah on Shabbos Chazon from Yeshayahu. Hashem doesn't need your zvachim. I don't need you to shecht an animal for me. I need you to bring a korban. A korban is l'karev. I'm doing this because I feel like I'm giving myself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why, especially when it comes to a korban chatas or an olah, which is also usually brought on some sort of an aveira. So you're doing it and understanding that should be me being shechted. And you walk away from that as a changed individual. The korban changes the way I look at it. And that's the idea of bringing a korban. A korban, something that I can relate to. It's not the act of the offering, it's the person who's offering it that's being offered. And that's what korbanos is ultimately supposed to do, and that's what the entire avoda is supposed to be for. Mirza Hashem, we should be zeicha to see it in our time. So that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can leave a comment. You can sponsor an episode. You can sign up for the Tefila series. You can still sign up for the Daf Yomi and the Mesilas Yesharim Shiur. We had somebody recently who joined the both of those Shiurim. It's very nice to have everyone on board. And, you can come in at any point. I certainly with Daf Yomi, right? And certainly with Mesilas Yesharim, I give enough of a background that you know where we're holding. You can contact me. You can contact the website if you're interested in the shidduch program that we may be starting. If you are interested in sponsoring the live event that's going to take place the week of Lag BaOmer in America, please contact us. And that's it. That's it. After Pesach, you have to catch up a little bit. So it's great to see you all back, and hope to see you next time. In the meantime, I am David Orlofsky, and this is the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.